Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
The ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. That is Isaiah 51, verse 11. I am your host, Sandra Flach. Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, where, as always, it is my honor and privilege to encourage you and equip you for your parenting journey. You are not alone. I am on this journey with you. I'm a mom of 8, 5 through adoption, including 2 adult sons, both diagnosed when they were little with fetal alcohol syndrome. We had many, many years of no resources or support or really clear understanding about what that meant. And we struggled for many, many years. And I don't want that to be the case for you. It doesn't have to be. This podcast isn't solely about FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, but because it really does affect a significant number of children in foster care, in adoptive placements, in kinship placements. Parents, every adoptive, foster, and kinship caregiver really needs to understand FASD, whether they know or not their kiddo was affected. But on this podcast, we talk about all of the things relevant to FASD, but not just FASD, but relevant to the adoption and foster care journey. Today, we're going to be focusing on the attachment through the lens of neuroscience with our favorite doctor, Dr. Jerrod Brown. But before we get to that, I just want to encourage you that this is a place, a safe place, a place for resources and support and encouragement. I hope that you will find that here, and I hope that you will also share about it with your fellow foster and adoptive friends. And also want to let you know, I keep putting out teasers regarding my upcoming book, devotional that I have written entitled Soul Care Saturday, 52 Devotions for Foster and Adoptive Moms. And we're praying that we will be able to release it in early November. So stay tuned for those details. And really to find out about that and all of our resources for foster and adoptive parents, go to our main website, which is justicefororphansny.org. There is a link in the show notes. And when you get there, it'll pop right up. There'll be a nice big circle on the left that says the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. And if you click that, it will take you to all of the things. It'll take you to this podcast, my blog, the support group. It'll take you to where you can sign up for trainings and where you can get parent coaching. And so all of the things are there. So I hope that you will check that out, as well as our adoption and foster care journey socials. We created new social media pages just for us, just for our adoption and foster care journey peoples that you can check out. And I hope that you will do that because we're trying to build those back up. And so we are on Instagram as AFC _J, I think it is. I don't have it in my notes. No, AFC, yes, AFC _journey. And then on Facebook, it's just the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. So I hope that you will go there, check it out. I always love to connect with our listeners. You guys are my favorite people. And if my voice sounds weird, I got some allergy things going on. But listening to this episode, I've already arrived back from CAFO in Houston, but I'm just about to turn around and go out the door and head to Chicago for the Replanted Conference, where I'll be leading a workshop entitled Wired Differently, Understanding FASD Trauma and the Brain. I'll have a I'm doing that breakout session, and I'll have an exhibitor booth there. So if you're able to get to Replanted, there is a link in the show notes on how you can register. If it's not too late, you can register there. But I also have some upcoming dates for 2026 already in January, specifically January 30th through February 1st. I will get to be at the Field Retreat, Jamie Finn of Foster the Family, their retreat, the Field Retreat in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I will be doing a breakout session there as well. I'm so excited because it's my first opportunity to even attend Field. So I'm super excited to be there. So I encourage you, mamas listening, get to the Field Retreat. I do understand it sells out rather quickly. So if you're listening to this and you're interested, go check out the website. We put a link in the show notes that'll take you right to registration for the Field Retreat. So I want you to go there and check that out. And I hope to see you there. I've got some other opportunities coming up in early 2026 as well. So I'll make sure that you keep knowing where I'm going to be. And if you want me to be where you're going to be, you can book me. You can invite me to come to your, whether it be a retreat or you're having a conference or your church's adoption and foster care parent group wants to bring me in for whether it's for FASD training or if it's for encouragement, some soul care, that kind of thing. I speak and teach and train and do all the things. So please reach out to me if you're interested in bringing me to bringing me to you, right? I can travel. I also do all the online things as well. So links in the show notes for you can check all of that out. Today, like I mentioned, we have our returning favorite doctor in the house. Dr. Jerrod Brown is going to talk to us about neuroscience and attachment, very important topics for foster and adoptive parents. Dr. Brown has 5 Ph.D.s and specializes in topics related to autism spectrum disorder, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, confabulation, suggestibility, trauma, and other life adversities, also alexithymia, executive dysfunction, criminal recidivism, traumatic brain injury, and youth firesetting. You can check out his full bio in our show notes. And if you go to our website, you have to go to the website justicefororphans.ny.org. And if you click on the adoption and foster care journey and click on podcast, it's pretty user-friendly and obvious. We actually have all of our special episodes with Dr. Brown listed out separately so that you don't have to scroll through. Because guys, this is actually like episode 501 of this podcast, which we started out as a radio show many, many years ago. If you listen to the previous episode, you kind of got the history because I kind of do an anniversary, or not an anniversary, but a celebration of the 500th episode for that we did last week. You can get all the details. But because Dr. Jerrod Brown's episodes are some of our most listened to and downloaded episodes, we have that all in a special spot on our website with some other information from Dr. Brown. So I want you to be able to go check that out if you would like to listen to more, because there's so much that we have been learning from him, and we're going to learn from him again today. So please welcome back to the show, Dr. Jerrod Brown. Hey, Dr. Brown.
Sandra, how you doing, my friend?
We're doing great. We're always I'm talking in the third person or something, but always great to have you. I'm doing great. Super excited to have you back with us this month. Our audience loves our conversations. And I know last month we talked about FASD from the neuroscience lens. And we are back today to talk about another very important topic for foster and adoptive parents, and that is attachment from the neuroscience lens. So would you just kind of kick us off by explaining, what do we mean by attachment? What is that?
Kind of our connection, mostly thinking about our connection to primary caregivers at first, but then that extends to grandma and grandpa, aunt and uncle, neighbors, family, friends, and our attachment patterns really do influence our actions as we get older. Our thinking and really our feelings. And if you look at the attachment literature, which there's been tens of thousands of studies on this. And in my doctorate degree program, we have comprehensive exams and we have to do a theory we have to write on and all that stuff. And it was like a massive paper I had to write on a theory, and I picked attachment theory. And the reason why I pick attachment theory, because it really does influence everything. Our connections with family and friends. And we'll talk about too, like attachment has a lot to do with not our mental health, but
Sure.
also our medical health as well as we get older. So having really good attachment, think of it as a force field. It's a protective factor. Unfortunately, a very, very high percentage of people have fractured attachment patterns, and that number is astronomically high in child welfare settings. Even if you're an adoptive parent and you've adopted your child at birth, that child may still have some attachment patterns because attachment starts in utero. A lot of people think it starts after you're born, when parents start picking up the child and cuddling and I love you, I care about, and saying all of those wonderful things. But really, it starts in utero. And what are things that can impact it in utero? Prenatal alcohol,
Mhm.
drug exposure. Maybe it's a pregnancy, unfortunately, that was a result of a sexual assault, or mom just had no interest at all being pregnant, carried that child all the way through, and she had the thoughts of, I don't want to be pregnant. Interestingly and sadly, those thoughts impact our hormones in the body. So neurochemically, that can impact that developing baby in utero. There's different kinds of attachment patterns. You look at the literature, there's like four that a lot of people talk about. Other researchers say there's a few more than that. But basically, what I'm going to talk about today is insecure attachment when something's not going right, and secure attachment when things went right in utero and early childhood. When we have secure attachment, and I'm pretty convinced after I know about attachment theory really well, I have attachment problems. There's no doubt about that. There's many reasons why we have attachment problems. But if you have really good secure attachment, and as you get older, you're more comfortable being alone sometimes. Not isolating, but you're less likely to be codependent. You have a greater sense of independence. Good attachment patterns set that child up as they get older to having good boundaries. So as that child gets older, you got really bad boundaries and you start befriending every person you meet for the first time. You don't get stranger danger. You are engaging in some really risky social behavior. That is rooted in problematic attachment patterns. Self-esteem and attachment go hand in hand. Good attachment helps have better self-esteem. Not good attachment can really get in the way of self-esteem. And I'll give you a practical example. If somebody has really poor attachment patterns, they might be always looking for validation from other people. That's hard to keep up with, because what happens if one day that person gives you a bad look or says something you don't like? That is soul crushing to some people with really bad attachment patterns. People with really good attachment patterns can say, well, that person's probably having a bad day. It's not going to get into their core and rock their world. I mean, those are a few things to think about. I'll stop talking there. See if you have any thoughts, Sandra.
Oh gosh, my mind is swirling. So many things. Um, and I think about, like you said, attachment starts in the womb. And I know just even with my youngest two who were adopted from Ukraine, and birth mom had two other children, their older siblings that we also adopted, but the parents had custody of those two children, but those children ended up in an orphanage. And then when the younger two came along, mom was pregnant for them, knew she wasn't going to parent, knew she was going to um, relinquish them, basically gave birth in a hospital, and then she signed herself out of the hospital and left the baby behind twice. So both of our boys, our youngest boys, have that as their earliest history. So I can imagine Mom was not attached to these two younger kiddos because she knew she wasn't going to keep them. She knew she was going to, you know, do something else, but she certainly wasn't going to parent. And I do believe I see signs of that in our boys. Now, both of our boys also have had prenatal exposure to alcohol. So there's all of that, but there
Yeah.
are things that are more, like just the, having the lower self-esteem, not feeling valued, wanting to try to sort of like very, very, they feel rejected very easily. You don't even, something that would be typical, somebody would brush it off.
Mhm.
They take it to the core. It's really, really hard. So, I totally, totally see that. And then even, um, you know, in early childhood when there's been a trauma, that can also affect attachment, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Big time. So, all kinds of trauma. We talked about the adverse childhood experiences research. So, that's a big one to be aware of. And just think too, like, just even maybe there wasn't physical trauma. What about early deprivation, where that child for the first several months was living in kind of an institutional care setting, where maybe they were getting proper care in terms of diapers being changed and getting the right amount of food formula, things like that, but there just wasn't a lot of nurturance, a lot of holding and things like that. Early deprivation, and this is different for every child, but the longer it goes on, it has been linked with more attachment problems, more executive function impairments as that child gets older, more mental health challenges as the child gets older, more memory problems, more learning deficits. It may impact their empathy as they get older. Why is that? Well, if you look through that neuroscience lens, there's a lot of neurobiological systems involved in like early trauma attachment disruptions. And when I talk about neurobiological systems, neuroscience, biology, hormones, neurochemicals, things like that. What can happen when we have trauma, deprivation prenatally or early on in life, that can fracture attachment patterns, which then can also adversely impact the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary adrenal axis. We did an episode on that a long time ago, I remember. Most people with FASD are going to have an HPA axis that's not working properly. That axis is a hormone regulator. So the byproduct, the end product of that axis is cortisol. That is a big reason why a lot of people with FASD don't sleep well. There's a lot more to that, but you really, as an adoptive parent, foster care parent, look at that episode we did. The HPA axis, you have to understand that. Very, very important. The autonomic nervous system is impacted by these things. We've all heard of like that flight response where we get like deers in the headlight during trauma. We run away, we shut down. Our nervous system doesn't work right. It could be hyper aroused where we get all worked up, and that can look like ADHD or impulse control problems. We could have a hypo kind of arousal where it's lower, whereas that child gets older. If they have a hypoactive nervous system in the classroom, it could look like that child is more spacey, more apathetic, more checked out. The teachers keep looking at this child. Why won't you participate? And the child might start get labeled as being lazy or defiant, when in fact, maybe it's a nervous system that's not working properly. And it's not working properly if we peel back the layers and we find out maybe there's childhood trauma or prenatal things. So equally important for caregivers and educators, when you see a child with these reactions, take a step back, be curious. Could there be something more to the story going on than this child's just being lazy or defiant? Our amygdala is very sensitive to childhood trauma and attachment issues. The amygdala is part of our limbic system in our brain. The amygdala is a very important area for like our emotional control center. There's a lot more to it than that. And then our prefrontal cortex, we talked about that many times. Executive dysfunction, metacognition impairments, that's kind of the central command center in the brain. Those are issues that people at FASD deal with all the time. Problem solving, decision-making deficits, reasoning problems, impulse control issues. There's a lot more to it from a neuroscience angle, but you'd want to be aware of the HPA axis, the nervous system, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. I think we've done episodes on all of them, but the amygdala, we might have to do one on the amygdala to round it out at some point, but definitely take a look at that. These are big topics, but those other episodes definitely go a lot deeper in the weeds with that as well.
Yes, and we have all of those on our website for sure. Gosh, there's so many different directions I think we could go. There's so many questions I have. So with the neuroscience, and how that affects the brain, right? That's what parents need to understand, that the brain has been affected, just like prenatal exposure to alcohol will affect brain development. Early trauma does the same thing, and especially if there's been that break with attachment with the primary caregiver, the birth parent, or an early caregiver, that's going to affect the way the brain functions, essentially. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. And then if it impacts their brain, it's going to impact their behaviors. And really hardcore attachment problems, like everything, it's on a spectrum. You might have really, really, really severe, mild to moderate. It depends on so many factors, but in general, more attachment problems trickle down into more confusion for that individual, more detachment from other people or from themselves. And as that child gets older, without the right supports and guidance in place, they are without a doubt vulnerable to more substance misuse and involvement in the criminal justice system. Most people in prison have attachment problems. Most people with attachment problems are not in prison. But we need to be aware of the role and impact that attachment has. If any of you know people or are professionals and you work with people with substance use disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, psychotic disorder, various kinds of personality disorders, the research is pretty clear on this. High percentage of clients for people with those diagnoses also have insecure attachment problems. It's not going to be 100%. But again, remember, attachment is a protective kind of shield. Without having good attachment as we get older, we're more vulnerable to all kinds of things. And the more vulnerability we have, the more likelihood as we get older, we might be dealing with more anxiety, more depression. We might turn to drug use, alcohol use, food addiction to cope with those feelings we have inside, because we might have a lot of trauma. We might have a lot of attachment issues. So anyone that has a child with these kind of things going on, or even with certain diagnoses like FASD, working with providers who understand these things is going to be very, very important.
Yeah. So Dr. Brown, what for parents who are listening and they're like, how do I know, like, what are the signs that there's an attachment issue with my child? Because they're like a list you could go down through that would give any red flags to a parent to start paying attention to attachment.
There are so many things out there. And what I'm going to share right now, it's not meant to diagnose. Work with your healthcare provider, but inappropriate displays of behavior, lagging behind other peers. So if you see a lot of developmental lag where that child, as they get older, they just seem a lot younger than their peer group. A lot of excessive need for attention. All kids love attention, but as that child gets older and it's constant need for attention where they have a hard time if mom or dad even walk in the other room just for 2 seconds, that's just something to be aware of. avoiding people. On the flip side of that, you could have a child with profound attachment problems who really be overly clingy. But on the flip side of that, you could have children with like reactive attachment disorder, where maybe they're really pulling away from people, or something called disinhibited social engagement disorder, which there's a lot to it, but you have indiscriminate friendliness where that child, you're out and about with that child just runs away from you all the time and just runs up to strangers, has no fear. By no means am I saying that child has that diagnosis, but it could be something to be on the lookout for. That child never shows any happiness. They're always flat. Could be a red flag indicator of some attachment problems. Unusual or kind of just odd eye contact as well, where they just don't make eye contact. Could that be a sign of something else? Of course, definitely. Maybe there's a prenatal head injury. I mean, there's a lot of things to be going on with to think about. Really unusual eating patterns as that child gets older. But that, again, these are red flag indicators. By no means it means they have attachment issues, because lots of kids with a neurodevelopmental disorder have really unusual eating patterns to begin with. Other things I think you want to be aware of too that could be a factor in some cases: high levels of intimacy and boundary problems as they get older, relying on other people for help over and over and over again, extreme codependence, extreme social isolation, and there's many more. I mean, I can go deeper in the weeds with that, Sandy, if you want.
Yeah, I know. I doing a little research myself. I was surprised to see things like uh, stealing, lying,
Yeah.
ADHD,
Yeah.
speech and language problems, learning disabilities, things like that. So many things. Some other ones that I came across that I was gonna point out is what about destructive to property or to self or to others, lack of impulse control. I'm also like, not every single thing on the list overlapped with what I know as primary symptoms of FASD, but many of the primary symptoms of FASD were also on this list of, signs of, attachment disorder, so to speak.
There's a couple studies in the FASD literature that were published several years ago, I think, that indicated maybe as many as close to 70% of people with FASD have attachment issues. That seems low to me. It, Again, the cases I consult on, people have FASD, they're usually people are reaching out when they've gone through so many other providers, and it's kind of they really need a different perspective. So there are probably plenty of people with FASD that have good attachment. I just don't see it in my work. Separation anxiety, profound separation anxiety among children with attachment problems can look like really panicked reactions, intensive anxiety, and really intense emotions. Reduced ability to calm down after getting worked up, where that child needs a ton of reassurance. That's different than maybe your other friends who have kids the same age. So behaviors that are really outside the norm of children that same age group. Extreme clinginess, profound sleep problems. You find plenty of research that shows attachment issues can impact sleep. And part of that reason is trauma, fear of the dark. Maybe that child's been in foster care setting after foster care setting, and
Right.
every placement they've had has had different bedtime rules, and that child has not had consistency. That can throw off your sleep as well. If your child, especially when we're talking about this trauma stuff, just flat out refuses to go to bed, that could be a trauma trigger, because what happens if that child, unfortunately, was assaulted in the bedroom at night at some point? So again, there could be trauma triggers here too with some of this stuff. So very important to have that trauma-informed lens and really becoming a trauma-informed parent. And I do think If you're a trauma-informed parent, what do you want to know about? What are some things you'd really want to take into account? Well, parental reflective functioning is something you'd want to be aware of, or parental mentalization. Basically, what that is in a nutshell is that caregiver having that good ability to really recognize that child's unique differences, their unique mindset, their mental state, their feelings, their beliefs, their desires, where you're leaning into that child, connection, eye contact, being aware of your voice tone, modeling parental sensitivity. Parents who are just very gentle and kind, children grow up a lot of times being kind and gentle. Parents who are extremely harsh and reactive to their children, that child may grow up and be more reactive and harsh to other people. Again, not always by any stretch of the imagination. If that child has these extreme mood swings, you as a caregiver, and we all know this, none of us are perfect, but don't match that mood swing. Stay calm, stay regulated, validate those emotions and stuff, and model to that child. Co-regulation, whatever you want to call it. These are all things rooted in reflective functioning. And it's a really important piece of the puzzle when we're talking about helping kids develop secure attachment patterns or improving on fractured attachment patterns. There's always things we can do to help improve attachment patterns. By no means am I saying if you have a child who has profound attachment patterns, if you do these things, it's going to get better overnight. It's going to take time, but I do think consistency with these things, it will get better. It's probably not going to be cured if we're talking about profound exposure to drugs and alcohol in utero, but it can really get better and more managed, to name a few.
Yeah, so just to go back a little bit to the FASD piece, like I said, many of the symptoms of, attachment disorder or reactive attachment disorder overlap with the symptoms of FASD. So how can parents know the difference? Because I remember this being me, right? Is this behavior from, attachment or connection or whatever, or is it because of the FASD, right? Is it the trauma or is it the FASD? Although we know FASD was trauma done in utero. Or does it even matter? Because so many of our kids, like you just mentioned before, so many kids with FASD also have attachment issues. Does it matter that we kind of like weed it out and try to figure out what is causing the behavior, or just understanding it's probably both and the approach is really the same way to try to build attachment?
I could be wrong on this, but I think it's both, and I really do,
I think
because
so.
it's hard to tease apart. Because when we think about FASD research, a high percentage of these children were abandoned, or there's elevated levels of institutionalization, or maybe they had the loss of opportunity during those first 1,000 days of life and beyond to really start to understand and be modeled what healthy emotions are. And then as that child gets older, higher levels of irritability, sleep problems, feeding problems, fear-related issues, and all of these things. And unfortunately, the work I do in the criminal justice arena, and again, by no means am I saying everyone with FASD does these things, but as they get older and these things aren't considered and we're not having the right interventions in place, aggression, anger, violence, sex crimes in some cases. These are the cases I consult on. As they get older, if they have FASD, fractured attachment patterns, FASD was never diagnosed, they're not in a loving, stable placement. No one's ever taken into account their attachment problems, their trauma histories. They start going into the K through 12 environment. Nobody has a clue this person has FASD. They start getting thrown into special education classes, learning disabilities. They get a little bit older. They start hanging out with vulnerable groups of people. These people take advantage of them. They start getting into drugs and alcohol. They turn 18. There's nobody around to monitor them. Criminal justice involvement happens frequently when we're talking about those scenarios. And there's a lot more to that. But what happens if we could play the tape over, go back, get the proper diagnosis, be in a loving, stable home like many of the audience members you have are raising children in a really lovely, calm, attachment-informed home. You start finding therapists, psychiatrists, medical doctors. Maybe it's a sensory occupational therapist, speech language pathology, and we start targeting these interventions. Maybe it's animal assisted therapy, art therapy, music therapy, whatever it is. We're eating healthy, we're getting good exercise, we're capitalizing on sleep, we're fixing the gut issues. That's a whole nother can of worms. Then that child grows up, probably isn't going to have these things, hopefully. And again, none of it's 100%. But if we could really take those things into account, including really looking at attachment, maybe as the foundation of the house, without having attachment and really capitalizing on making sure that child feels valued, heard, known, and safe, it's hard to get interventions in place that work and stick without the basics starting out.
So much great stuff to unravel there. And that's, I find that I agree that there, I don't have the percentages off the top of my head today, but so many children in child welfare have been, I think the last statistics I read was about, and I think this was out of Minnesota from the folks at Proof Alliance, and it may be an older stat, but 80% of the children with FASD in Minnesota are in child welfare, are in foster care. So we see a lot of that kind of thing where, we see higher numbers of children with FASD in the adoption and foster care population. And then the different things that you were listing off with trouble with criminal justice and all of those things are really those tertiary symptoms, as if it's not understood, if it's not diagnosed, they've not been supported, things can really unravel over time. And then we get those extreme situations when it's not understood. And so many of our kids in adoption and foster care are also, have attachment issues. So it's sort of a compounded problem.
What do we do about this too, where maybe that child, teenager was in the foster care system, bounced around from foster care placement to foster care placement. Now they age out of that system and they were never adopted. They never had the connections with like a primary base. The research on this is very sad and scary. And again, every child is different, but you will find research that does talk about kids who exit the foster care system once they become an adult and they never got that placement and they were just bouncing around. Way, 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 way more likely to have histories of trauma, homelessness as they exit out of that system, more financial problems, more educational completion issues where they did not complete high school. And if that's the case, they're probably not going to college. More employment problems. A very high percentage of these kids who age out of foster care also deal with food insecurity. We did an episode on that as well. Food insecurity is a trauma in and of itself. And then there's a whole line of literature on this. There's a lot of controversy with this, but that foster care to crime connection. If you're in foster care, that does not mean you're committing crimes. But if you're in foster care and you don't have proper supports, services, you've had a ton of trauma, you age out of that system, you are more likely to probably come into contact with the justice system for a variety of reasons, including vulnerability and victimization, not just for committing a crime. But some of these kids, unfortunately, as they get older, are also more likely to enter into relationships that may result in domestic violence as well. And
Human
then,
trafficking comes to mind. There's such a high
yes,
number of kids
yes,
in foster care that run
yeah,
away or age out
yes.
and without permanency, foster care. And I know there's been studies done on the number of incarcerated individuals who have spent time in foster care. So many individuals who are incarcerated have been in foster care. So it's all, to me, it's all connected, it's all linked. And it's so important to know and understand these things. And for our parents listening, as hard as it can be on some days, we are making a difference, because if we can bring that stability, we can avoid a lot of these more dire outcomes that are so likely without that support.
And one other thing I just want to plant the seeds on here. Why should we really care about this topic early on in life? There is also research that does show, again, not everybody, I don't want to alarm people, but really poor attachment patterns early on in life, as we get older, we may be more susceptible to chronic pain issues in adulthood, cardiovascular disease issues, things with the heart not working properly, and more really inflammation-based illnesses. And that goes to the heart of the adverse childhood experiences research, which that research basically shows people under the age of 18 who have had more traumas happen to them without then the proper supports and services as they get older, they're more likely to die sooner than the general population. Cancer risk goes up, diabetes, broken bones histories go up more. I mean, there's literature on all of this. You're more likely to be obese, you're more likely to smoke cigarettes, gambling addiction. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on, but everyone is different, of course. But fractured attachment patterns, ACEs research is so important for all of us to be aware of, including in your organization. There's a whole line of literature for leaders listening to this, coaches, anyone supervising people. There's a whole line of research literature on attachment-informed leadership approaches. If you want to help your staff be healthier, reduce burnout, just Google that, read some articles on that. It's a great approach to infuse into your organization. If it's a government agency, if it's a nonprofit, if you are supervising just a few people, attachment-informed leadership leads to better outcomes for your staff and your overall organization as well.
Yeah, and I see it even beyond in my family, older, other people in my extended family. I can recognize, some attachment issues, because especially in when you're in relationships with people, and if you have difficult relationships with people, when you understand attachment, you can see, you need to know your own attachment style, I believe, but also understanding that, really this person's behavior and how they function in relationship is it's highly likely they've got some kind of attachment issue or some kind of history of trauma that we may or may not know about, but being sensitive to that is important, I believe.
Yeah, I agree too, 100%. Can I give you some interventions?
Yep. Let's get to that in just 1 second here. I'm going to
Yeah, of course.
our listeners listen to our commercial about our support group.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets neurobehavioral model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphansny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphansny.org/hope-community.
So definitely want to talk about interventions, because I know now understanding neuroplasticity, right? That new neural pathways can be formed. We can learn if we don't have a healthy attachment style, we can learn a healthy attachment style, correct?
Sure, it takes work, of course, but yeah, neuroplasticity, looking at that and repetition learning that their unique learning styles, their cognitive profile. So maybe the child, teenager would have done well getting a neuropsychological assessment, and just really matching the interventions to that child's developmental age. You take a developmental approach to intervention where you're really honing in on attunement, empathy, validation. Body awareness interventions can be very helpful, working with providers who can help that child, teenager recognize body cues. Because for some of these kids, they have alexithymia, emotional blindness, where they can't describe their emotions, but their body feels it. Headache, eye pain, they start feeling really warm. They're just shaking inside, and being aware that those could be trauma triggers. That could be anxiety. Being really aware of those physiological factors involved here as well. This is all common sense, but the more we can promote positive family experiences where you're looking at your family system and you really capitalize on loving and supporting each other. We all know this. Making people in that family system feel like they matter. Everybody has a voice. There's no favoritism. You're responsive to that child's needs. You don't dismiss them and minimize them. Those are things that are really important. Having positive parenting practices, being a good role model to your child is very important. Consistency. You are modeling healthy behaviors to that child. You're teaching them good sense of moral reasoning, which is basically you're teaching empathy and right and wrong, and those things can be easier said than done with some children who've been exposed to alcohol and drugs in utero. Playing with your child where you're not playing with one hand and you're texting in the other. Put the phone down, just really look into your child. You have those positive interactions. We've talked about this in other episodes too, but really understanding the benefits of shared meal times together, where you sit down, you talk as a family, you share what happened during the day. You have a technology detox day where just get technology out of the room as much as humanly possible. There was a really good article that was published, I think in 2015, called Positive Behavioral Interventions and Support. I think it's called Family Support for People at FASD. And that article talks about some really nice family focus interventions. And again, it's all common sense, but they talk about having a good, stable, and nurturing home environment. You're really capitalizing on healthy and positive attachment patterns. You are focusing on promoting self-efficacy. You're being mindful as a parent of your own stress, and you're not putting that stress onto your child. And you're really recognizing what services, resources you need as a family system as well. So those are a few things. I have many more I can share, Sandra, if you'd like.
Yeah, I know when you mentioned, positive interactions, play. I remember early on when my boys were diagnosed with FAS, but we had no resources way back then on FASD specifically. But I, stumbled across the Connected Child book, which they talk a lot about attachment styles and attachment and building attachment and disarming fear. And play was a big part of that. And so I remembered that. So we built in a lot of play. I mean, even now, especially with our younger son who's going to be 20 this month, board games. We play a lot of board games as positive interactions, just doing fun activities, laughing together, being silly together. Every kid is different, so it might, you might have to try different things based on your kiddo, but play is I have found personally, has a huge positive effect with attachment.
Playful engagement would be a good term for your audience just to type in the internet. It kind of ties into exactly what you're saying. If you are a family and your child's dealing with a lot of needs, maybe working with a play therapist. Play therapy has been linked with so many positive benefits, teaching that child more empathy and self-control. And it's a great way to focus on increasing and enhancing attachment patterns as well.
And
Parents, go ahead.
I was going to say, and
Yeah.
positive physical contact,
Yes.
positive
Yep.
touch.
Yep. Huge. All of this is huge. And mindful parenting practices would be something you as a caregiver would probably want to know about. And basically, mindful parenting practices is just really listening to your child with full attention where you're not multitasking. You're utilizing non-judgmental approaches. You're being really emotionally aware of your own self and your child. You have good self-regulation in your parenting where you're not yelling and screaming at your kids and those kind of things. And then you're showing great compassion for yourself as a parent and for your child. So self-compassion, very, very important as well. And with self-compassion, I think we all can do well with that. If we screw up as a parent, nobody's perfect. If we screw up, whatever it is, the more that we can forgive, we can look inward. I had a bad day. I had a bad moment. That doesn't mean I'm a bad parent. High levels of self-compassion are linked with more optimism, happiness, higher levels of emotional intelligence. I think we've done an episode on neuroparenting and trauma-informed parenting in the past. I would highly recommend your audience taking a look at those things as well. And art therapy can be helpful, just sitting down. That ties into what you said too. Playing, what about art? Drawing together, getting Play-Doh out, taking an art class together. Just sitting and reading to your child. That actually promotes brain development, positive child-parent interactions, attachment, all these things. And animals too, if appropriate. Getting animals in the mix. Maybe it's equine therapy. Maybe it's animal-assisted therapy. There are people with FASD that I know personally who have found great benefit of working with like an animal therapist or an animal interventionist as well.
Yeah, those are all such good strategies. The eye contact was, I know you mentioned eye contact a little bit ago, because that was very clear to me with our youngest when he first came home at 5, spent all 5 years of his life in an orphanage, in an institution. And eye contact was just not something that he could do. But I had been learning through the connected parenting strategies, how to, just little ways to get them to make eye contact, like, let me see your beautiful eyes, or what color are your eyes today? Just little, where that's not scary to them, but just enough of a eye contact. I love your beautiful green eyes, or whatever it is. We did a lot of that in the early days as well.
I forgot to mention early on today, which ties into that from our neuroscience lens, our attachment, early things we want to be aware of is something called joint attention, which goes to the heart of eye contact. There's other things to it as well. Joint attention is also known as shared attention, which is a early precursor to developing healthy and effective communication and language skills. So basically, joint attention, when it develops effectively, like you're the caregiver, you're going out on walks with your child, you're pushing the child in the stroller. Every little bit, you stop the stroller, you lean down, give your child a kiss. I love you, look them in the eye. Maybe you're walking past a basketball court or someplace where people are playing or something. You hear a basketball bouncing. The child hears a basketball bouncing. Joint attention is when that child looks over at the basketball and then maybe looks back at you. And then maybe you give the, oh, that's cool. That's great. That looks like they're having fun. Bad joint attention that's not developed properly, that child might not even recognize or notice anything bouncing. They look at it and they just stare at it and they won't look away. That might be an early precursor to eye gazing problems, pointing issues as that child gets a little bit older. It plays a huge role in verbal and nonverbal communication. When it's working properly, the research says it should develop. You should start seeing it emerge pretty good around 9 months of age and be really well established by 18 months of age. It's a early, I hate to say it's a sign, but it's one of the signs of maybe autism. It can be disrupted by trauma and attachment issues. And children that have a lot of trauma early on in life, they don't develop this effectively because maybe they haven't had a parent who looked at them and modeled that eye contact, and you're going out and talking about things, even though the child can't respond, their brain is soaking that in. So joint attention might be another one we might want to look at from a neuroscience angle too. It's a really important topic.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Nurture, is something else that a lot of times children with adverse childhood experiences have lacked, in not attaching to a caregiver early on, or having a disrupted attachment with a caregiver. And there's that lack of nurture. One of the things that we learned, back when our first kids came home, and through the connected parenting stuff, really was, to nurture, to meet their needs, right? Every 2 hours, we were giving a healthy snack and a drink of water. We were making sure they knew if they had, if they'd gotten a little boo-boo, and my boys didn't even like acknowledge that they had gotten hurt, right? But I made a big deal over it, had to put a Band-Aid on it, just sort of overly gave the nurture, to try to make up for the lack of nurture that they had.
Some people might say, well, you're overly pampering the child. They need to toughen up. My opinion, I think nurturing is so important, and really leaning down, I am so sorry, and really leaning into that and stuff. I think what you're doing is so important. You can't overly love a child, in my opinion, and stuff. Obviously, you need to teach independence and those kind of things, but early on, a lot of these children who've had a lot of this not so good stuff happen to them before they come to your wonderful home, they need extra reassurance. They may not be able to verbalize that. They may put up a guard and like act like they could care less. I don't believe that they feel that way. They just need consistency. They're so used to maybe people abandoning them, especially if you get a child who's a little older who can talk and they've been bounced around from placement to placement. But yep, I think all of that is so important in this big complicated puzzle of helping repair attachment, not curing attachment wounds in some cases, but making it a lot better, more manageable, and then teaching that child as they get older to recognize these things. And as I get older, I recognize these issues in myself. I got bullied and teased terribly in third and fourth grade. I do think that still impacts me today on some level, but I recognize it now, and it just pops up in my head. Okay, that's probably what that is and stuff. And I do think that played a role in some attachment issues, even though I was a little bit older in life too.
What about, Dr. Brown, our older kids? So a lot of us have kids who are teenagers, young adults. Like, is it ever too late to try to build attachment, with our kids, or with older, with adults?
No, I don't think so myself. No, is it going to be harder? I think so. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think yes, it will be harder. Teenagers are obviously more vocal. For some kids, teenagers who are maybe placed in a new home, you might have more behavioral problems, more screaming, yelling, swearing, running away behaviors that can be very, very stressful and challenging. But that's when you need a good team of folks, a good therapist, good counselor, in-home workers, consistency, loving that child no matter how old they are. And maybe they run away, maybe they elope and they get mad. But if you create that safe zone for them and you are loving and kind, hopefully they return very quickly and stuff. And I've seen that happen, definitely. And it's harder. Stay the course, work with other people, good self-care, because it can be very, very stressful on that family system.
Yeah, and I can relate to that and speak to the fact that I believe it's not ever too late, because I know the first child that came into our home, after our biological children, she was a kinship placement, and she came at 8, and we didn't know anything about trauma. We didn't know anything about attachment. We didn't know anything about FASD. She was a relative, and because she came to us, she didn't go into foster care, so we didn't even have the benefit of foster parent training classes. So we did all of the things wrong, right? We parented her just through traditional parenting, which never really worked, and there was always challenges. We slogged through. I anticipated her teenage years to be terrible. They weren't great, but really her 20s were a disaster. And then she was out of our house by then, and there was a lot of strain on the relationship. But as we were raising our younger two, that, with the FASD, and we began learning about connected parenting principles, we started learning and understanding trauma and attachment, and we were doing, applying all of those things to them. I began to recognize, oh my goodness, this girl, she was a child who had experienced significant adverse childhood experiences. We just didn't know any of that or how to do it. So I just began, when I could, making attempts at building connection with her. Little things. I think one of the first things I remember doing with her is she was no longer living home, but we were doing a family portrait outside. So everybody was, asked to come and be in the family portrait. And she came, which was hard for her. And she brought her dog. She's definitely a pet lover. And she brought her dog. And then we were setting up and getting in our positions to get photographed outside. And she had her dog with her. And one of my other adult kids said, "Mom, she's got her dog." Like, in other words, like, don't let the dog be in the picture. And I'm like, I know she does. And she needs the dog. And her dog was in our family portrait. And even though he wasn't our family dog, I knew at that point, I finally understood she needed that dog. And she didn't ask, can I have the dog in the picture? I just knew she needed that dog. And I just I didn't neigh it. I didn't say anything. I just allowed it. And I felt like that was a little money in the bank, So then the next time, there was a little something I could do. And so we've built this relationship. We've rebuilt our relationship, to the point to where, when she had her baby 3 years ago, and she moved out of state, she was far away. She wanted me to come to be there for the delivery and to be in the delivery room and to be where, and, unfortunately our grandson was born with, a congenital heart condition, needed multiple surgeries early on. But I was the one, she was calling on a lot of other people that in her circle, but I was one of the only ones who could actually fly across the country and be with them. She wanted me there, and I was one of the only people who could actually physically be there with them. And that went a long, long way towards rebuilding our relationship and building connection. And she's in her 30s now. So it's never too late, I don't think, as long as we start understanding how to do that. And how important it is, and that there is hope especially when our kids are older and the relationships can be more strained.
Never too late. Definitely. That's the takeaway. Never too late for these things. Might take more work, but it's worth it.
And sometimes I think we have to, change how we've always. I'll give another example because, we grew up in a very conservative Christian church for many, many years. And like Halloween was like, nobody did Halloween. But this particular daughter loved Halloween. And when she got married, they announced that they were going to be getting married. They got engaged, and they wanted their wedding, which happened to be a Saturday, on October 31st, and they wanted to have a theme and have all that. And of course, the first thing, like I had to really talk myself down off of, you can't, we don't do that. You can't, I went along with it. And we had fun with it. And it turned out to be one of, so many of our friends were saying, this was the best wedding reception we've ever been to. It was fun. Some people came in costume, not everybody had to, but we just had such a good time with it. It was super, super fun. And, me laying aside, some of that to just say yes. It's kind of like and I know in some of the connected parenting stuff, we learn about the power of saying yes, because our kids have had so many no's and have had no control of the things that have happened to them before coming to us. When we can give them that voice and allow, give those yeses. So, that's what we did. And we had one of the funnest weddings. And again, that was like more money in the bank in our relationship.
Well, great stories gives me hope too.
Yeah, definitely. So I know we've mentioned the Connected Child book, which I highly recommend every time people ask me what they should read if they're going to adopt or do foster care, and that whole trust-based relational intervention. There's lots of resources. We'll put links in the show notes and whatnot for that. But as we wrap up, Dr. Brown, Any last thoughts on this topic? What, about attachment? What can we do? Anything else that you want to make sure we touch on?
I think it's important to look through a holistic, interdisciplinary, collaborative lens because, in my opinion, what's good for attachment is probably good for the brain and body. So get good sleep. I sound like a broken record. Eat healthy food. Be around positive people. Exercise. As a parent, take care of yourself. Be sensitive and timely in your responses. Use appropriate stimulation as well. You talked about touch. There's a whole line of literature on effective touch. Stimulation, getting outside in nature more. That doesn't mean like being glued to the screen, so reduce screen time exposure. Play together, laugh together, have dinner together. Try to enjoy each other's company. Bring other people in, being around positive people. Look at neighborhood attachment as well, not just what's going on inside your house. But the more you can help that child get connected to their neighborhood, your neighbors. You walk down the street, people start knowing that child's name. Hi, so-and-so, and you're waving, and that child says, oh, cool, they like me. And connect with your local different kinds of playground areas and after-school programs and whatever it is. Just get connected to different people because the more that child can feel known, heard, valued, supported, appreciated by not just you as a caregiver, by lots of people. And we all have heard this many times. It takes a village. I do believe it takes a village to repair these things as well. Can't do it alone. So that's my takeaway points.
I love that. So again, Dr. Brown, thank you for diving into attachment with us today. I know we're going to have you back next month, and I believe we're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences through a neuroscience lens. And we definitely want to tackle that. So important. So stay tuned for that, our listeners. And thank you again so much for being with us today, Dr. Brown.
Thank you. Thank you for all the stories too. It gives me a lot of hope.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Jerrod Brown as we discussed attachment from a neuroscience lens. I also want to mention some other resources that are some of my favorites. Of course, I mentioned the Connected Child book. If you have not read that yet, I highly, highly recommend it. It's by Dr. Karen Purvis and Dr. David Cross. And then there's the Connected Parent, which is with Lisa Qualls and Dr. Purvis. So highly recommend those books. And then there's also a couple of podcasts, the Empowered Parent podcast with Ryan and Kayla North. I faithfully listen to that podcast. They talk about attachment stuff all the time. Love them. And then also there's another one. It's called the Connected Parenting Minute by Will and Carrie Ann Stanfest. They are also adoptive parents. I think they've been guests on this podcast before. I'm pretty sure they have. And they have at least one kiddo with an FASD. So highly recommend those resources if you want to kind of dive in a little bit more and kind of get a steady diet of attachment and connected parenting, just training and learn more and more. So I highly recommend those. And as well as, all of the resources on our website, the FASD resources. You're very familiar with that now, to go to justicefororphansny.org and go to our the Adoption and Foster Care Journey button, big round circle there, and you'll get all of our resources, including this podcast, which you probably listen to this podcast from your phone, from Apple or Google or all of the. My mind is blanking, but all the different podcast platforms that you can listen to. But all of the episodes are also on our website. And if you're looking specifically, it's probably the easiest way for you to find the episodes with Dr. Jerrod Brown, because we kind of have them all in one place on the website. You can go there and check out because we've done so many episodes over the years with Dr. Jerrod Brown, and they're so vital. And they're some of our most popular episodes. He's a very popular guest, and he gets deep in the weeds on these topics that are so important to us. So I highly recommend, if you're kind of a newer listener, if you haven't listened to those episodes, go to our website and check it out, and you'll be able to find them for sure. We have multiple bonus episodes with Dr. Jerrod Brown. And then, of course, all of our other resources from the workshops and the support group and all that are there as well. And there's a link in the show notes. We're here to support you, to encourage you, and to equip you for this unique parenting journey. I've got some great workshops coming up on FASD online. So, of course, if you're listening to this and it's mid-October, it's not too late for you to sign up for our deep dive on FASD, which is 15 hours worth of training. It is 5 weekly 3-hour sessions, and everybody who participates will get a certificate of completion, so you can use it towards your foster parent training hours for your continuing education there. And not only do you get that certificate, you get excellent training and understanding FASD from a neurobehavioral approach, and you get just better equipping and tools to help you parent and raise your kiddo with an FASD, whether they're diagnosed or not, right? And we had a parent who has a young adult son with autism, and they took the training. He's a biological child, and just absolutely loved everything that she learned. So it benefits every parent, I think, especially foster and adoptive parents, to take that training. So check that all out. Subscribe to this podcast, follow it, follow our socials. Find us, The Adoption and Foster Care Journey, on Facebook and Instagram. And again, I am grateful that you spent your valuable time with me today. I'm thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans. And check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.